What happens when the man you've loved for 10 years, the man you're carrying a child for, gives your dream home away? Not to you, but to his mistress. He hands her the keys to a $10 million mansion, leaving you his pregnant wife with nothing but eviction papers and a broken heart. He thought he had planned the perfect betrayal, securing his new life on the foundations of your shattered dreams. But he made one catastrophic mistake. He never bothered to check who held the real power, and who, in the end, held the one piece of paper that mattered more than any key, the original undeniable ironclad deed to the entire estate. Olivia and Mark Sterling were the couple everyone wanted to be. Their love story was the stuff of modern fairy tales, a decade-long romance that had blossomed from a college library meeting into a formidable partnership. Mark, with his sharp blue eyes and even sharper business acumen, had climbed the corporate ladder at a prestigious New York investment firm, Sterling and Finch. Olivia, a brilliant architect with a quiet strength and an eye for beauty, had put her own promising career on hold to support his meteoric rise, managing their lives and creating a sanctuary of a home for him to return to. Their life was a curated collection of beautiful moments: weekends in the Hamptons, skiing trips to Aspen charity galas, where they moved as one, a portrait of effortless grace and success. To the outside world, they were golden. After 10 years of marriage, they were finally embarking on their most anticipated project, a family. Olivia was 5 months pregnant with their first child, a boy, and the news had seemed to catapult their happiness into a new stratosphere. To celebrate, Mark had made the grandest of gestures. He purchased a breathtaking Georgian-style mansion in Westchester County, a sprawling estate with limestone facades, manicured gardens, and a history as rich as its new owners. "It's our forever home, Liv," Mark had whispered, his arms wrapped around her as they stood on the grand terrace overlooking a sea of green. "A place for our son to grow up, to run on the lawns, to build a legacy." Olivia had cried, her heart swelling with a love so profound it felt tangible. The house named the Oakhaven was more than brick and mortar. It was the physical manifestation of all their shared dreams. She spent weeks with blueprints and designers, pouring her soul into every detail. She envisioned the nursery with its hand-painted mural of whimsical animals, the library where their son would learn to read, the grand dining room filled with laughter during future holiday feasts. Yet in the midst of this idyllic planning, a subtle chill began to creep into their perfect world. It started small, almost unnoticeable. Mark began working later, his arrivals home pushed from dusk to deep night. The unavoidable client dinners became more frequent. When he was home, he was distant. His phone, a permanent extension of his hand, its screen angled away from her. The easy laughter that once filled their apartment was replaced by a tense silence, punctuated only by the tap-tap-tapping of his fingers on a screen. "Everything okay at work, honey?" Olivia asked one evening, rubbing her swollen belly as Mark stared blankly at a financial news channel. He flinched as if startled from a deep trance. "What? Oh yeah, fine. Just a big merger. The Viridian project, it's consuming." She tried to connect, to bridge the growing chasm between them. "Tell me about it. I want to understand." "It's complicated, Liv. You don't need to worry your pretty head about it." He said the words meant to be reassuring, but landing with a dismissive thud. He stood up and kissed the top of her head, a gesture that felt more like a habit than an act of affection. "You just focus on nesting. Focus on our boy. I've got everything else handled." Olivia tried to believe him. She blamed her unease on pregnancy hormones, on the anxieties of impending motherhood. Mark was a good man. He was her man. He was building this incredible future for them. The Oakhaven was proof of his love and commitment. It stood on a hill just outside the city, a grand white promise of their future. She clung to that image, using it as a shield against the creeping tendrils of doubt. She told herself that once they moved in, once the baby arrived, the warmth would return, and this strange, cold chapter would be nothing but a forgotten memory. She had no idea that the house wasn't a promise but a stage, and the final act of their marriage was about to be a tragedy she could never have imagined. Doubt once planted is a stubborn weed. It grew in the quiet moments, in the space between Mark's clipped responses and his vacant stares. Olivia found herself becoming a reluctant detective in her own home, searching for clues to a crime she couldn't yet name. The first tangible piece of evidence was a credit card statement. Olivia still managed their household finances, a role Mark had gladly ceded to her years ago. Tucked between charges for bespoke baby furniture and organic groceries was a name she didn't recognize: Isabella Rossi. The charges were astronomical. A $5,000 charge at Cartier, a series of lavish dinners at Daniel, a restaurant they had once saved for their own special anniversaries, and a recurring monthly charge for $2,000 labeled simply as Apartment Lease, Greenwich Village. Her blood ran cold. They didn't know an Isabella Rossi. They didn't have an apartment in Greenwich Village. She confronted him that night, her voice trembling as she held the paper. Mark, who is Isabella Rossi. Mark's practiced calm was chilling. He barely glanced up from his tablet. She's a consultant on the Viridian project, a rainmaker. The firm is covering her expenses to keep her happy. It's standard corporate schmoozing live. You know how it is. And the apartment. A corporate rental, for when she's in town from the London office. He said, his explanation smooth and immediate. Too smooth. It's all above board. Don't worry about it. He finally looked at her, his eyes holding a flicker of something she couldn't decipher. Annoyance, pity. Honestly, live with everything I'm doing to get Oakhaven ready for us. I'd appreciate a little trust. He had weaponized their dream. He used the mansion as a shield, a way to make her feel guilty for her suspicion. And for a little while it worked. She retreated ashamed of her prying, telling herself she was being paranoid. But the weed of doubt had taken root. A week later, her best friend, Khloe, called. Her voice was hesitant. Liv, I don't want to stir up trouble, but I saw Mark yesterday. Okay, Olivia said, her heart starting to pound. He had that dinner with the Japanese investors. Well, Khloe said, drawing out the word. He was at Balthazar, and he wasn't with any Japanese investors. He was with a woman, a tall, stunning brunette in a red dress. They were very close, holding hands across the table. The line went silent as the world tilted on its axis. Did you get a good look at her? Olivia whispered. I'm so sorry, Liv. She looked like she could be a model, and the way he was looking at her. It wasn't a business dinner. The description fit a phantom an idea, until Olivia, in a moment of desperate self-destructive curiosity, typed the name Isabella Rossi and Sterling and Finch into a search engine. There she was, in a staff photo from a recent charity event hosted by the firm, standing right next to Mark. Isabella Rossi wasn't a middle-aged consultant from London. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with cascading dark hair, fiery eyes, and a confident smirk. She was breathtakingly beautiful, and her hand was resting possessively on Mark's arm. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with a sickening click. The late nights, the secret calls, the emotional distance. It wasn't the Viridian project. It was the Isabella project. That night, Olivia didn't sleep. She sat in the dark, the blue glow of her phone illuminating the tears on her face as she scrolled through Isabella's public Instagram profile. It was a highlight reel of a life funded by her husband. Photos of designer bags she recognized from the credit card statement. Cocktails at bars. Mark had claimed he was visiting with clients. A photo of her wrist adorned with a new Cartier love bracelet captioned, "Some people just know how to make a girl feel special." Blessed. The post was from the day after the charge appeared on their statement. The most damning post was a picture of her standing in front of a grand white Georgian-style mansion. The angle was artfully chosen, but Olivia knew every column, every window, every perfectly pruned bush. It was Oakhaven. Her Oakhaven. Isabella's caption read, "Site visit for my future palace." Dreams really do come true when you have the right thing by your side. The air left Olivia's lungs in a pained gasp. This wasn't just an affair. It was an invasion. This woman wasn't just in her husband's bed. She was in her home, in her future, in the nursery meant for her son. The betrayal wasn't a crack in the foundation of their marriage. It was a demolition. Mark wasn't just cheating on her. He was actively replacing her, and he was using their shared dream as the centerpiece of his new life. The quiet resolve that had defined Olivia for so long began to harden into something she didn't recognize, a cold, focused fury. Armed with the terrible certainty of the truth, Olivia decided the confrontation couldn't happen within the walls of their shared apartment. That space was already tainted a museum of their dying marriage. She needed neutral ground, a place where Mark's carefully constructed facade would be the hardest to maintain. The annual Sterling and Finch benefit gala was in 2 days. It was the firm's most important social event, a night where Mark paraded her around as his perfect wife, a testament to his stable, successful life. It was the perfect stage. She spent the next 48 hours in a haze of controlled anguish. She went to her final dress fitting for the gala, the soft silk of the emerald gown, feeling like a costume. The seamstress cooed about how beautifully it draped over her baby bump. Olivia smiled, a hollow gesture that didn't reach her eyes. She felt like a Trojan horse, smuggling a devastating truth into the heart of her husband's kingdom. The night of the gala, the air crackled with false pleasantries and the clinking of champagne flutes. Mark was in his element, a king holding court. He beamed, placing a proprietary hand on Olivia's belly for the photographers. "My beautiful wife," he'd say to his colleagues, "giving me the greatest gift of all." The hypocrisy was so profound, it was almost surreal. Olivia played her part, smiling graciously, her mind a whirlwind of strategy. She spotted Isabella across the grand ballroom. She was a vision in crimson, laughing with a group of junior analysts, occasionally stealing glances at Mark. She radiated a smug triumph, the confidence of a woman who believes she has already won. Olivia waited until Mark was deep in conversation with Mr. Finch, the firm's senior partner. She excused herself, her heart a drum against her ribs, and made a direct line for Isabella. "Isabella Rossi." Olivia said, her voice even and calm, cutting through the other woman's laughter. Isabella turned, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second, as she took in the sight of the very pregnant wife of her lover. She recovered quickly, her expression shifting to one of polite confusion. "Yes, I'm sorry. Have we met?" "Not formally," Olivia replied, letting the silence hang for a moment. I'm Olivia Sterling, Mark's wife. The junior analysts around them suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. Isabella's chin lifted defiantly. Of course. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Mark speaks so highly of you. The audacity of the statement nearly stole Olivia's breath. Does he... And what else does he do with you, Isabella? Does he take you to Daniel and buy you Cartier bracelets with my husband's money? Does he sign the lease on your Greenwich apartment from our joint account? Isabella's face paled, the color draining from beneath her perfect makeup. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do, Olivia said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying the weight of steel. I also think you know your way around the Oakhaven estate in Westchester. You called it your future palace, I believe. Let me be perfectly clear. You are a footnote in my husband's life. A dalliance. That house, that life you've imagined for yourself is a fantasy. Stay away from my husband, and stay away from my home. Before Isabella could retort, Mark was there, his face a mask of fury. He grabbed Olivia's arm, his grip surprisingly tight. Olivia, what the hell are you doing? You're making a scene. Am I? Olivia said, looking from his furious face to Isabella's shaken one. I was just introducing myself to your consultant. Isabella is a valued colleague, Mark seethed, pulling Olivia away towards a secluded alcove. You're embarrassing me. You're embarrassing yourself. Once they were out of earshot, his facade crumbled completely. You have no idea the damage you've just done. The Viridian project is delicate. My career is on the line. Your career? Olivia laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You're destroying our marriage. You're flaunting your affair. You're spending our money on this girl, and you're worried about your career. You're being hysterical. He spat the classic gaslighter's defense. It's the pregnancy hormones. You're not thinking clearly. This isn't what it looks like. Then what does it look like, Mark? She cried, tears finally breaking free. What does it look like when my husband is buying another woman jewelry and taking her to the house he bought for our son? He didn't have an answer. He just stared at her, his expression cold and hard. The man she loved, the man whose child she was carrying, was gone. In his place was a stranger, a liar, who looked at her, not with love, but with cold, hard calculation. We will discuss this at home, he said, his voice a low threat. Now go fix your makeup and go back out there and smile. Do not ruin this night for me. In that moment, Olivia understood the full depth of his narcissism. Her pain was an inconvenience. Their marriage was a prop. She was just a part of the scenery. But as she watched him walk away to smooth things over with Isabella, a new feeling began to eclipse the pain, a chilling, crystalline clarity. He thought she was hysterical. He thought she was weak. He had no idea who he was dealing with. The gala wasn't the end of the confrontation. It was merely the beginning. The drive home from the gala was a silent, frigid affair. Mark didn't speak. His jaw clenched, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Olivia stared out the window, the glittering lights of the city blurring into streaks of cold fire. The confrontation had changed nothing. It had only forced Mark's deception further into the open. When they got back to their apartment, the charade of civility was dropped. How could you? He began, not with an apology, but with an accusation. To do that in public, in front of my boss, my colleagues, you have no idea what you've done. I know exactly what I've done, Olivia said, her voice devoid of the tears he expected. I exposed a liar. The only question is, what are you going to do about it? What he did was something she never could have anticipated. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't deny it further. He doubled down. Over the next week, he executed a plan of such calculated cruelty, it was sociopathic. He started by claiming they were in financial trouble. "The Viridian project fell through Liv," he said one evening, his face a perfect mask of feigned devastation. "The market's turning. I was over-leveraged. We're going to lose everything." He produced fabricated documents, official-looking letters from the bank detailing foreclosure proceedings. He spoke of bankruptcy, of having to sell their apartment, their cars. It was a masterful performance. "What about Oakhaven?" Olivia asked, her heart a leaden weight in her chest, though she knew the answer. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair, in a gesture of pure theatrical despair. "It's the first to go. The bank is seizing it. There was a clause in the financing. I'm so sorry, Liv. I tried to build a kingdom for us, and I failed." He was trying to break her, to dismantle her world so thoroughly that she would be too weak to fight, too grateful for whatever scraps he threw her way. He painted himself as a tragic hero, a man who had aimed for the sun and gotten burned, all for the sake of his family. Then came the final brutal blow. A few days later, a courier delivered a thick envelope to their door. Inside were official-looking legal documents. It was a quit-claim deed transferring ownership of the Oakhaven property. But the new owner wasn't a bank or a corporation. The name typed in bold letters was Isabella Rossi. Accompanying it was a letter supposedly from Mark's lawyer, explaining that in a last-ditch effort to settle a significant debt and avoid total financial ruin, the property had been signed over. It was all a lie, a smoke-screen, to legitimize the transfer of their dream home to his mistress. He presented it to Olivia as a tragedy. She was a major investor in the project. He lied, his eyes oozing false sincerity. Her father is a powerful man. It was either give her the house or face criminal charges for fraud. I did it to protect us, Liv. To protect you and the baby. He was gifting a $10 million mansion to his mistress and telling his pregnant wife it was a noble sacrifice. While Olivia was reeling from the sheer audacity of his lies, Isabella was celebrating. Her Instagram became a shrine to her victory. She posted a photo of herself, champagne flute in hand, standing on the grand staircase of Oakhaven. The caption read, "Home sweet home." Time to redecorate and clear out the old energy. #new beginnings #. Queen of the castle. She posted stories of designers walking through the rooms discussing tearing down walls and replacing fixtures that Olivia had painstakingly chosen. She was erasing Olivia painting over her existence with gaudy new money taste. Mark moved out a week later under the guise of giving her space. But Olivia knew he was moving in with Isabella at Oakhaven. He left his pregnant wife in a rented apartment he claimed they could barely afford, while he and his mistress played house in the mansion he had stolen. He thought he had won. He thought Olivia was broken, isolated, and powerless. He saw her as a casualty of his ambition, a sentimental relic of a life he was eager to shed. He had taken her home, her future, and her dignity. He believed he had left her with absolutely nothing. But Mark, in his all-consuming arrogance, had forgotten one crucial detail. He had forgotten about Olivia's father, Richard Davenport, a retired corporate lawyer with a mind like a steel trap, and a deep-seated distrust for his son-in-law. And he had forgotten about the one true document that Richard had insisted upon signing from the very beginning. For 3 days, Olivia did nothing. She existed in a grey fog of shock and grief, the cruelty of Mark's betrayal, a physical weight pressing down on her. The world he had built for her was a lie, and the future she had envisioned had been stolen and handed to another woman. She ate only when her baby's kicks reminded her she was responsible for another life. It was that flutter, that tiny, insistent pulse of life within her that finally pierced through the despair. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about her son. She would not let him be born into a world where his father's treachery had won. On the fourth day, she picked up the phone and called the one person she knew would see through Mark's web of lies, her father. Richard Davenport arrived at her small rented apartment within the hour. A tall, formidable man with kind eyes and a will of iron, he had been a titan in the world of mergers and acquisitions for 40 years. He had retired, but his legal mind was as sharp as ever. He had never fully trusted Mark, sensing a hollowness beneath the charm, a brittle ambition that overshadowed everything else. He listened patiently as Olivia, her voice cracking but resolute, laid out the entire sordid story. She showed him the credit card statements, the pictures from Isabella's Instagram, and the quitclaim deed Mark had used to transfer Oakhaven. Richard examined the documents, his expression hardening with each page. When she finished, he didn't offer platitudes or empty comforts. He simply said, "The boy is a fool, a greedy, arrogant fool, and he is about to learn a very expensive lesson." He walked over to his briefcase and pulled out a slim, leather-bound portfolio. "Mark thinks he's a master of the game," Richard said, a grim smile touching his lips. "But he's playing checkers, and he doesn't realize I set up a chessboard from the very beginning." He opened the portfolio and laid a document on the table. It was titled The Oakhaven Revocable Living Trust. "When Mark told me he was buying Oakhaven," Richard explained, "I told him I wanted to contribute a significant amount as a gift to you and my future grandchild, $1 million. It was a wedding gift I'd been saving." Olivia looked at him confused. "He never told me that." "Of course he didn't," Richard scoffed. "Because I attached a condition. I told him my contribution was contingent on the property being placed into a specific type of trust. He was so eager to get the money and close the deal, he signed whatever I put in front of him, without, I suspect, letting his own lawyers read the fine print." He slid the document across the table. Olivia read the key clauses, her eyes widening. Her father had structured the trust with masterful precision. Olivia Davenport Sterling was named as the sole beneficiary. More importantly, she was also named the sole trustee. Mark was listed only as a co-grantor, with no power to make any decisions regarding the sale or transfer of the property, without the express notarized consent of the trustee. As the trustee, Richard explained, his voice low and steady, "You and only you hold the ultimate power over that property. You are the legal authority. Mark signing a quitclaim deed to his mistress is like a renter trying to sell the Eiffel Tower. It's a worthless piece of paper. It's a fraudulent conveyance. He committed a crime, Olivia." A slow burning fire ignited in Olivia's chest, incinerating the last remnants of her grief. It was hope, fierce and bright. "So, the house is still mine." "My dear girl," her father said, his hand covering hers. "The house was never not yours. Mark was just a temporary resident with delusions of grandeur. The original notarized and filed deed is in this portfolio, safe and sound. It lists the Oakhaven Trust as the owner, and you as the one in charge of it all." The pieces of a new plan began to click into place in Olivia's mind. Mark and Isabella were living in her house, redecorating her rooms, celebrating their victory on her property. Isabella had planned a lavish housewarming party for the upcoming weekend. The invitations had been ostentatiously shared on social media, a final twist of the knife meant for Olivia to see. It was intended to be the grand coronation of the new Queen of Oakhaven. "They're throwing a party," Olivia said, a dangerous glint in her eye. "A housewarming party. All of Mark's colleagues and clients will be there. Everyone who has seen me as the pitiable, discarded wife." Richard saw the shift in her, the transformation from victim to warrior. The lioness was awake. "What do you have in mind?" he asked. "Mark wanted a scene at the gala. I think I can do better," Olivia said, a real smile finally returning to her face. "I think it's time I formally welcomed everyone to my home." The Oakhaven estate glittered under the August moon, a jewel of limestone and light against the dark Westchester hills. The party was an exercise in calculated opulence, a declaration of arrival. A string quartet played Vivaldi on the terrace, mingling with the sophisticated hum of conversation and the clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Inside the grand hall was a sea of bespoke suits and designer dresses, a veritable ecosystem of New York's financial elite. At the center of this universe stood Mark Sterling and Isabella Rossi. Mark was in his element, radiating the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had successfully executed the coup of a lifetime. He moved through the crowd with an easy charm, one hand holding a glass of vintage scotch, the other perpetually touching Isabella's back, marking his territory. He accepted congratulations with a practiced humility that barely veiled his immense pride. "A bold investment," he'd say, with a dismissive wave of his hand. "The market was right, and we were fortunate to get in. A true legacy property." Isabella was a vision of triumph. She wore a molten gold backless gown that clung to her like a second skin. She was radiant, laughing a little too loudly, her eyes sweeping across the rooms she now commanded. She had systematically erased every trace of Olivia. The warm, inviting elegance Olivia had planned was gone, replaced by a cold, modernist aesthetic that screamed of new money. Stark white walls were punctuated by enormous abstract paintings that were more about price tag than passion. Gilded panthers stood guard by the fireplace, and the furniture was all sharp angles and gleaming chrome. It was less a home and more a gallery of her victory. "To us," she whispered to Mark during a quiet moment near the French doors, her fingers tracing the lapel of his tuxedo. "We did it. The castle is ours, and the old queen, I hear, she's holed up in some dreary little apartment, probably crying into a pint of ice cream. Pathetic." Mark smirked, pulling her closer for a kiss that was performative and proprietary. She got what she deserved. She couldn't keep up. This is our world now. It was at that exact moment, at the precise zenith of their arrogance, that the world they had built began to fracture. The great oak doors at the front of the hall, which had been closed to signal the party, was in full swing, swung open with a quiet, deliberate weight. A sudden hush fell over the room, starting near the entrance and spreading like a ripple through the crowd. The music from the quartet seemed to falter. All heads turned. Framed in the grand doorway, silhouetted for a moment against the dark night, stood Olivia Sterling. She was not the hysterical, broken woman of their gossip. She was a figure of breathtaking composure. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored navy blue silk gown that fell gracefully over her 5-month pregnancy, a silhouette of quiet strength and impending motherhood. Her hair was swept back, her makeup understated, and her eyes, clear and steady, held no trace of tears, only a chilling, crystalline resolve. Beside her stood her father, Richard Davenport, his posture radiating an authority that no amount of money could buy. He was not just a guest, he was a presence, They stepped inside, and the doors swung shut behind them, with a soft, definitive click sealing everyone inside with the impending confrontation. Mark's face went through a rapid series of micro-expressions, utter disbelief, then a flash of pure panic, followed by a hardening mask of rage. Isabella froze her champagne flute, held halfway to her lips, her perfect smile cracking like cheap plaster. "Olivia," Mark hissed quickly, crossing the marble floor to intercept her before she could move further into the room. His voice was a low, urgent whisper meant to intimidate. "What in God's name are you doing here? This is a private event. You need to leave. Now." Olivia met his furious gaze without flinching. Her voice when she spoke was not a whisper. It was calm, clear, and carried easily through the tomb-like silence of the hall. "That's interesting, Mark. I wasn't aware I needed an invitation to enter my own home." A collective audible gasp went through the crowd. People shifted uncomfortably. This was no longer a party. It was a reckoning. "Your home." Isabella had found her footing, striding forward to stand beside Mark, a united front of usurpers. Her voice was sharp, laced with condescending pity. "Oh, you poor thing. You must be confused. The stress of your condition must be getting to you. Mark gave me this house. It's a gift. It's mine." "A gift," Olivia repeated, a faint, mirthless smile touching her lips. She let her eyes drift from Isabella's defiant face and scan the room, meeting the gazes of several of Mark's senior partners and their wives' people she had known for years. "I'm sure you've all heard some version of that story tonight. Mark is exceptionally good at telling stories. He told me a story about how our family was facing financial ruin. He told me a story about how this house had to be signed over to settle a massive corporate debt to protect his family. He's a wonderful storyteller." She took a deliberate step forward, her presence commanding the full attention of everyone present. The problem with stories, however, is that they aren't facts. They are fiction. And tonight I'm afraid the fiction ends. "That's enough, Olivia." Mark's voice was louder now, a desperate attempt to regain control. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Security," he called out, looking wildly for the event staff he'd hired. "Don't bother." Richard Davenport said, his voice the calm, booming baritone of a seasoned courtroom lawyer. It cut through Mark's panic like a surgeon's scalpel. "They won't be necessary. We are not here to cause a scene. We are here to present a legal and binding fact." From the slim leather portfolio he carried, Richard produced a single official-looking document with a blue ribbon at the bottom. He didn't hand it to Mark or Isabella. He held it up for the room to see. "This," he announced, his tone leaving no room for argument, "is the originally filed, notarized, and legally unimpeachable deed of ownership for the Oakhaven estate. It is owned by a legal entity known as the Oakhaven Revocable Living Trust." He then passed the document to his daughter. Olivia took it, her hand steady. She held it not like a weapon, but like a simple, undeniable truth. "And this," Olivia continued, her voice resonating with a power no one in the room had ever heard from her before, "is the governing trust document. It names me Olivia Davenport Sterling as the sole trustee and the sole beneficiary of that trust. For those of you who aren't familiar with trust law," she said, looking directly at Isabella, "that means I and I alone hold the exclusive legal authority to control, manage, or transfer this property. It means, quite simply, that this house belongs to me." The room erupted in a storm of whispers. The pieces clicked into place for the financially astute crowd. They understood trusts. They understood legal structures. and they understood they were witnessing a fraud being exposed in real time. "The quitclaim deed Mark signed over to you, Isabella," Olivia said, her voice dropping, becoming almost gentle. "Which was somehow more devastating, is a fraudulent document. It is legally worthless. It's a prop from one of my husband's stories. You are not the queen of this castle. You are merely a guest, and I'm afraid your welcome has expired." "This is a lie, a trick," Mark sputtered, his face slick with sweat. He looked desperately at his boss, Mr. Finch, who was watching the scene unfold with an expression of icy contempt. "She's a scorned woman, trying to ruin me." "A lie." Richard Davenport stepped forward again. "Mr. Sterling, conveyance fraud is a Class D felony in the state of New York. I took the liberty this afternoon of couriering copies of all these documents, including the fraudulent deed bearing your signature, to the Westchester County District Attorney's office. They found it a most compelling narrative. I believe their investigation will begin tomorrow morning." The mention of the district attorney of a felony was the final fatal blow. Mark Sterling visibly deflated the last of his blustering rage, vanishing, replaced by the stark primal fear of a man who sees a prison cell in his future. Isabella looked as if she'd been struck by lightning, her face a mask of utter horror as she realized she wasn't just losing a mansion, she was implicated in a serious crime. Olivia let the silence hang for a final heavy moment before delivering her verdict. "This party is over," she announced, her gaze sweeping across the stunned guests. "I ask you all to please leave my home now. As for you, Miss Rossi, I am giving you 24 hours to have your personal effects removed from these premises. The locks will be changed at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. If you attempt to enter this property after that time, you will be arrested for trespassing." Finally, she turned to the man she had loved for a decade. She looked at Mark, at his ruined face and shattered ego, and she felt not hatred, but a profound and weary pity. He was a small man who had made a catastrophic miscalculation. "Mark," she said, and her voice was quiet, now meant only for him. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours. Goodbye." And with that, Olivia Davenport Sterling, holding the deed to her house and the key to her new life, turned her back on the wreckage. She and her father walked calmly out of the grand hall, leaving behind a deafening silence, 2 social lepers, and 100 powerful witnesses to the moment a king and his counterfeit queen were dethroned in the very castle they had stolen. The silence that followed Olivia's departure from Oakhaven was more damning than any shouting match could ever have been. It was a vacuum sucking the air out of the room, leaving behind only the wreckage of Mark and Isabella's grand illusion. The jazz band had trailed off, mid-song. The caterers froze with trays of untouched hors d'oeuvres, and the guests, 100 pairs of eyes wide with scandal, began a quiet, hurried exodus. They scurried away not just from the scene of a social disaster, but from the toxic fallout of Mark Sterling's implosion, eager to distance themselves from a man who had so spectacularly self-destructed. Within 20 minutes, the grand hall was empty, save for the 2 architects of its ruin. Mark stood frozen, his face the color of ash, the triumphant host reduced to a pillar of impotent fury. Isabella had collapsed onto a gaudy velvet and gold sofa she'd had delivered just last week, her glittering dress now looking like a cheap costume amidst the debris of her shattered fantasy. The half-empty champagne flutes, the discarded napkins, the wilting floral arrangements, they were no longer symbols of a grand debut, but artifacts from a sunken ship. "Do something," Isabella shrieked, her voice raw and stripped of its earlier seductive purr. She scrambled up, pointing a trembling, red-nailed finger at him. "You told me this house was mine. You promised me. You said she was a weak, emotional wreck who would just roll over." Mark finally snapped out of his trance, his shock curdling into a venomous rage directed at the most convenient target. "Shut up, Isabella. Just shut up. You and your idiotic social media posts, queen of the castle, did you think she wouldn't see that? You pushed her. You paraded this entire thing in her face and you forced her hand. I forced her hand." She scoffed, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. "You're the one who lied. You told me it was all handled, that the transfer was ironclad. You're the brilliant investment banker, the master of the universe. Turns out you're just a stupid, arrogant man who couldn't even be bothered to read the fine print on his own $10 million house. Their bond forged not in love, but in a shared, selfish conspiracy dissolved in the harsh light of failure. The insults became more vicious, the accusations more desperate. They were two rats trapped in a sinking core, turning on each other, now that the water was rising. Meanwhile, miles away, in a quiet suite at the Carlisle Hotel that her father had booked, Olivia was methodically taking off her jewelry. She felt a profound and surreal sense of calm. The storm had passed, and she was left standing in its quiet, clear eye. Her father sat in an armchair, sipping a brandy, watching her with a gentle pride. "You were magnificent," Richard said, his voice soft. "You were not vengeful. You were factual. There's a difference. You simply reclaimed what was yours." "I feel empty," Olivia confessed, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "Not sad, not even angry anymore, just empty, as if I've been playing a role for 10 years and I just walked off the stage." "That's because you have," her father replied wisely. "And now you get to write your own script. The stage is all yours." As she sat there, a tiny, insistent flutter in her belly reminded her that she wasn't alone on that stage. Her son was with her. She placed a hand over her bump, and for the first time in months, a genuine, unforced smile touched her lips. The emptiness was already beginning to fill not with the past, but with the promise of a future she would build on her own terms. The consequences of that night cascaded through the following week, with the speed and finality of a guillotine. On Monday morning, Mark Sterling walked into the glass-walled offices of Sterling and Finch, determined to perform the greatest act of damage control of his life. He had concocted a story of a vindictive, mentally unstable ex-wife and a complicated legal misunderstanding. He strode towards his corner office, but was intercepted by Mistress, Finch's personal assistant, a woman who had always greeted him with a deferential smile, and now looked at him as if he were something she'd scraped off her shoe. "Mr. Finch will see you in the main boardroom. Now." The walk to the boardroom was a gauntlet of averted eyes and sudden hushed whispers. The entire firm already knew. Jonathan Finch, a man in his late 60s, with a reputation carved from granite, was not alone. The firm's general counsel and head of human resources were with him. There was no friendly greeting. "Mark," Finch began his voice, devoid of any warmth. "I have received upwards of 30 calls since 9 o'clock Saturday night. From clients, from board members, from journalists. They all witnessed the same thing, one of my senior executives attempting to defraud his wife and pass off a stolen asset as his own." "Jonathan, it's a gross misunderstanding," Mark stammered, his prepared speech turning to ash in his mouth. "It's a messy divorce. She's—" "Save it," Finch cut in, holding up a hand. "I don't care about your marital troubles. I care about the integrity of this firm. You used your position and status, a status this firm afforded you, to perpetrate a fraud. You entertained our most valuable clients in a home you had acquired under false pretenses. You have made Sterling and Finch a laughingstock, and worse, you have exposed us to reputational risk of a catastrophic nature. Your actions have demonstrated a shocking lack of judgment and a moral character that is incompatible with the principles of this company." It was a corporate execution. Mark was fired effective immediately. His unvested stock options were voided, his bonus cancelled. The General Counsel slid a termination agreement across the vast mahogany table, informing him that given the circumstances of his departure, the firm would not be contesting his unemployment claim, a pathetic final insult. Security guards who had been waiting discreetly outside then escorted him to his office to pack his personal effects into a single, humiliating cardboard box before leading him out the service elevator. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of Isabella Rossi at her desk, staring at her computer, pointedly ignoring his final pathetic exit from the world he had sacrificed everything for. Isabella's own downfall was quieter, but no less complete. She was a pariah. Colleagues spoke to her only when necessary, their conversations clipped and formal. The junior analysts who once fawned over her now barely met her gaze. She was no longer the glamorous, powerful consultant. She was the other woman in a scandal, a failed gold digger. She tried calling Mark, but his number was disconnected. She emailed him, but the messages bounced back. Within a week, she submitted her resignation, unable to endure the silent, suffocating judgment. Her grand New York adventure was over. She packed her designer clothes and the now worthless Cartier bracelet into suitcases and booked a one-way flight back home, her ambition and reputation in tatters. The divorce proceedings were Mark's final desperate battle. Humiliated and furious, he hired a notoriously aggressive lawyer and tried to fight back. He countersued ridiculously, claiming emotional distress and demanding half of all marital assets, including a 50% stake in the Oakhaven Trust. He attempted to paint Olivia as a cold, calculating woman, manipulated by her wealthy father to ruin him. It was a pathetic spectacle. In the deposition, Olivia sat with a quiet, unshakable composure. She answered every question truthfully and simply, her pregnancy a silent testament to the future Mark had tried to destroy. When Mark's lawyer tried to corner her, insinuating she had planned the public humiliation, her father's attorney calmly intervened. "Are you suggesting," he said, in a voice as smooth as polished stone, "that my client should have quietly accepted your client's infidelity, his gaslighting, his theft of a multi-million-dollar asset, and the fraudulent conveyance of said asset to his mistress? Because if so, we can certainly have your client testify to that under oath." The judge, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, reviewed the evidence, the fraudulent quitclaim deed, the financial statements detailing Mark's lavish spending on Isabella, the iron-clad trust document her father had so wisely established. The ruling was devastating for Mark. The Oakhaven Trust was declared Olivia's sole and separate property, untouchable. His claims were dismissed as frivolous and vindictive. Due to his egregious marital misconduct and attempts at financial fraud, the judge awarded Olivia the majority of their liquid assets. Mark Sterling, the man who had dreamed of being a king, walked away with little more than a mountain of personal debt and a tarnished name that would follow him for the rest of his life. With the legal battles behind her, Olivia's final task was to let go of Oakhaven. The mansion was a chapter she needed to close. Before the real estate agent staged it, she went back one last time. The house was empty now, scrubbed clean of Isabella's garish decor and Mark's lingering betrayal. Sunlight streamed through the large paned windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. She walked through the cavernous rooms, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. She stood in the space she had designed as a nursery, picturing the mural of whimsical animals she had wanted to paint. There was a pang of sadness not for Mark, but for the dream itself, for the innocent belief she'd once had in their shared future. But it was a gentle sadness, like a faded photograph, not a sharp, open wound. This house was a beautiful shell, but its spirit had been corrupted. It wasn't her home anymore. As she was leaving, she met the couple who were finalizing the purchase. They were a warm, vibrant family, with 2 young children who were already chasing each other across the vast lawn. The wife, a woman about Olivia's age, beamed at her. "It's just breathtaking," she said, her eyes shining with hope. "We can't wait to fill it with noise and chaos and life." Olivia smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "It was made for that," she said. And in that moment, she knew she had made the right choice. She wasn't abandoning a dream. She was passing it on to someone who could live it. She found her own dream in a sun-drenched 4-story brownstone in Brooklyn's Park Slope. It had a small private garden, high ceilings, and original plaster moldings. It wasn't a palace, but it had character and warmth. It was a home. She poured her heart and her own architectural talent into renovating it, not as a showpiece, but as a sanctuary. She designed the nursery herself, painting a soft, beautiful mural of a forest under a starry sky on the main wall. She reconnected with old colleagues, took on small freelance design projects, and slowly, piece by piece, began to rebuild her professional identity, this time on her own terms. 3 months later, Olivia gave birth to a beautiful, healthy boy with a tuft of dark hair and his mother's calm, observant eyes. She named him Ethan Richard Davenport. As she held him in the quiet of her sunlit living room, the noise of the city a distant hum, she felt a sense of peace that was deeper and more profound than any happiness she had known with Mark. This was her life, a life built not on a gilded illusion, but on a foundation of her own strength. She had faced the ultimate betrayal and had not only survived, but thrived. She had lost a husband who saw her as an accessory, but she had found herself a formidable woman, a loving mother, and the sole undisputed architect of her own magnificent life. Looking down at her sleeping son, she knew that the greatest legacy she would ever build wouldn't be made of brick and mortar, but of the resilience, courage, and unconditional love that now filled every corner of their home. Olivia's story is a powerful reminder that the ultimate power doesn't lie in wealth or status, but in truth, resilience, and the quiet strength it takes to reclaim your own narrative. She was pushed to the absolute brink, betrayed by the person she trusted most, but she refused to be a victim. She used her intelligence, her resources, and her courage, not for revenge, but for justice, securing a safe and prosperous future for her and her child. This story isn't just about a cheating husband and a stolen mansion. It's about the incredible power that can be unlocked when a person decides they will no longer allow someone else to write their story for them. What did you think of Olivia's incredible comeback? Was her move at the party the perfect way to expose them all? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you were moved by this story of strength and survival, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear a story of empowerment, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas and incredible stories. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. The rain that lashed against the wrought iron gates of the Davenport mansion wasn't just weather. It was an omen. For Khloe Walsh, it was the sound of her world shattering. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and betrayal. Her husband, the tech millionaire Jonathan Davenport, stood before her. His handsome face a mask of cold fury. He wasn't just ending their marriage. He was erasing her. Pregnant, terrified, and with nothing but the clothes on her back, she was cast out into the storm. Little did he know he hadn't just thrown away his wife. He had declared war on a silent giant, a man who had watched over her from the shadows her entire life, a man whose name could make kings and presidents tremble. Life as Mrs. Jonathan Davenport was a lesson in beautiful imprisonment. Khloe had met Jonathan at a small art gallery, where her paintings, vibrant and full of raw emotion, were on display. He was charming, effusive, and intoxicatingly powerful. He saw her. He said a rare flower in a world of weeds. He showered her with gifts, whisked her away on private jets, and within 6 months, she was Khloe Davenport, mistress of a sprawling Long Island estate that the press had dubbed the Glass Palace. But the glass, she soon learned, was for looking in, not out. Jonathan, the CEO of Davenport Tech, a rising star in the cutthroat world of Silicon Valley East, was a man obsessed with image. Her art, once the very thing that drew him to her, became a messy hobby. Her friends from her old life were deemed unsuitable. Her world shrank until it contained only Jonathan and his formidable mother, Beatrice Davenport. Beatrice was a woman carved from ice, whose approval was a currency Khloe could never seem to earn. She viewed Khloe as a temporary adornment, a pretty placeholder, until Jonathan found someone from their own stratosphere. Beatrice's quiet condescension was a constant corrosive drip. "That dress is lovely, dear," she'd say, "for someone with your background." The news of Khloe's pregnancy should have been a joyous occasion. When she told Jonathan, placing his hand on her still flat stomach, he smiled for the cameras in his mind. "A Davenport heir," he'd boomed, kissing her forehead with performative delight. But in private, the warmth vanished. A baby was an inconvenience, a disruption to his meticulously planned 5-year corporate expansion. "Are you sure about this, Khloe?" he asked one evening, swirling a glass of Macallan 18. "It's a bit premature. It will affect our travel schedule." "It's a baby Jonathan, not a scheduling conflict," she replied, a sliver of her old fire showing through. His eyes narrowed. "Everything is a scheduling conflict, my dear. You should know that by now." The chill between them deepened. Beatrice's visits became more frequent, her whispers to Jonathan more venomous. Khloe felt like a ghost in her own home, her pregnancy the only thing that felt real. She would spend hours in the West Wing studio Jonathan had begrudgingly allowed her the smell of turpentine and oil paints, her only comfort. She painted with a feverish intensity, channeling her fear and loneliness onto the canvas. The end came with a sudden brutal efficiency. Jonathan returned home from a week-long business trip to Zurich, his face a thundercloud. Beatrice was with him, a grim sentinel. "I know what you've been doing," Jonathan spat, throwing a glossy 8x10 photograph onto the marble coffee table. Khloe stared at the image. It was her having lunch in the city a few days prior. Sitting across from her was David Chen, an old friend from art school who had been visiting New York. In the photo, the angle was deceptive. David was leaning in his hand near hers on the table, a look of concern on his face as she spoke. It looked intimate, conspiratorial. "Jonathan, this is David. He's a friend. He's gay, for God's sake. We were just catching up." "A likely story," Beatrice sneered. "I had my suspicions. A girl like you, Khloe. Your kind is never satisfied." "What are you talking about?" Khloe's voice trembled, a cold dread seeping into her bones. "Don't play dumb!" Jonathan roared, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "While I'm working to provide this life for you, you're sneaking around with your friends. You thought you could pass another man's child off as mine, as a Davenport." The accusation was so monstrous, so utterly insane, that for a moment Khloe couldn't breathe. "Jonathan, that's a lie. This is your baby. I love you." Her words were like sparks hitting wet stone. He was beyond reason, his eyes filled with a righteous fury she now realized was completely manufactured. This was a performance. This was her execution. "I want you out," he said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm level. "Now, out." "What do you mean?" She whispered, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. "Jonathan, I'm pregnant. It's pouring rain. Where would I go?" "I don't care," he said, pulling out his wallet. He peeled off 5 $100 bills and threw them on the floor at her feet. "That's more than you were worth when I found you. Consider it severance." Beatrice smiled, a thin, cruel slash of red lipstick. "Security will see you out. Don't take anything. The clothes you are wearing are of course a gift." 2 burly men in black suits appeared as if on cue. They didn't touch her, but their presence was an unmovable wall. Numb with shock, Khloe walked towards the door. She didn't look back. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. As the heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, sealing her out of the life she knew. The first clap of thunder rattled the sky. She stood on the manicured stone steps of the glass palace, a 3-month-old life growing inside her with $500 and a shattered heart, as the heavens opened up and wept. The city at night is a different beast when you have nowhere to go. The glittering lights of Manhattan, once a symbol of her new life, now seemed to mock Khloe. The rain plastered her thin silk blouse to her skin, and the $500 in her pocket felt as useless as sand. Her phone. It was inside on the nightstand. Her credit cards cancelled, she was certain. Jonathan was nothing if not thorough. She found a dingy all-night diner, the steam from the kitchen fogging the windows. She ordered a cup of tea she couldn't afford to drink and sat in a corner booth shivering. The reality was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She was homeless, pregnant, alone. Her first and only call was to her best friend, Jessica. Using the diner's grimy payphone, she choked out the address. An hour later, Jessica burst in her face, a mask of fury and concern. "That monster! That absolute monster!" Jessica raged as she bundled Khloe into her tiny, cluttered apartment in Queens. She wrapped her in a thick blanket and forced a warm mug of soup into her hands. "We'll fight this, Khloe. We'll get a lawyer. He can't just do this." But Khloe knew better. Jonathan's lawyers were sharks from the most expensive firms in the city. They could bury a person in legal fees and paperwork until they simply ceased to exist. Against the Davenport Emperor, she and Jessica were ants. For 3 days, Khloe existed in a fog of grief. She barely ate, barely slept. The baby was a constant, fluttering reminder of everything she had just lost. Was it his? Of course it was. But how could she ever prove it against the lies Jonathan would weave? On the 4th night, while Jessica was at her waitressing job, Khloe was rummaging through the single suitcase of old belongings she had stored at her friend's apartment relics from her pre-Jonathan life. At the very bottom, beneath old sketchbooks and worn-out sweaters, was a small, lacquered wooden box. Her parents had died in a car crash when she was 19, leaving her with little more than a mountain of medical debt and this box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, impossibly thick business card. The paper was creamy and heavy, the text embossed in a simple, elegant font. Arthur Pendleton. Pendleton and Associates. Fidelitas et fortitudo. Below the name was a phone number and a private address on Fifth Avenue. Her father, a kind but perpetually struggling history professor, had given her the box on her 18th birthday. Khloe. He had said, his voice serious. This is for an emergency. Not a my car broke down emergency, but a the world is ending emergency. This man, he was my dearest friend. He is your godfather. He made me promise that if anything ever happened to me, you would have his protection. Don't ever lose this. She had never called. Her pride, her desire to make it on her own, had always stopped her. Contacting some mysterious, powerful friend of her father's felt like giving up. Now she had nothing left but giving up. The world, as her father had predicted, felt like it was ending. Her fingers trembling, she picked up Jessica's landline phone. It was almost 10 p.m. It was a crazy long shot. She dialed the number. An automated system picked up. You have reached the after-hours security desk for Pendleton and Associates. Our offices are closed. Khloe's heart sank. Of course. If this is a personal matter for Mr. Pendleton, please state your name and the nature of your call after the tone. Messages are transcribed and reviewed. A beep sounded. Khloe took a shaky breath. My name is Khloe Walsh. My father was Professor Michael Walsh. He told me to call this number if I ever truly needed help. I truly need help. She hung up, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. It was a message in a bottle thrown into a digital ocean. He probably wouldn't even get it. Or if he did, why would he care about the destitute daughter of a friend he hadn't seen in over a decade? She curled up on Jessica's lumpy sofa, the business card clutched in her hand, and for the first time in days, she cried herself to sleep. She was woken just after 7 a.m. by the insistent buzzing of Jessica's phone. Jessica, bleary-eyed, answered it. Hello? Yes, she's here. Who is this? Oh. One moment. Jessica held the phone out to Khloe, her eyes wide with disbelief. Khloe, it's for you. It's a woman named Ms. Albright, from the office of Arthur Pendleton. Khloe's heart hammered against her ribs. She took the phone. Hello, Miss Khloe Walsh. The voice was crisp, professional, and held an undercurrent of warmth that was instantly calming. My name is Genevieve Albright. I am Mr. Pendleton's chief of staff. He received your message. He has cleared his entire morning schedule. He would like to see you at your earliest convenience. A car is waiting for you downstairs. Khloe was speechless. She looked out Jessica's third-floor window. Down on the street, parked between a beat-up sedan and a recycling truck, was a gleaming black Bentley. The Bentley was an island of silent luxury gliding through the raucous morning traffic of Queens and into the stately canyons of Manhattan. Khloe felt impossibly small and out of place in its plush leather interior. She was still wearing a borrowed sweater from Jessica and a pair of old jeans. She hadn't even had time to properly brush her hair. The car pulled up to a discreet limestone building on Fifth Avenue, a few blocks from Central Park. There was no grand sign, only a small polished brass plaque that read Pendleton and Associates. A doorman in a sharp grey uniform opened her door before the car had even fully stopped. "Miss Walsh, welcome. Mr. Pendleton is expecting you." She was led not into a typical office lobby, but into what felt like a private library. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves were filled with leather-bound books. The air smelled of old paper lemon oil and money so old it had forgotten how to shout. Miss Albright, an elegant woman in her late 50s, with silver hair swept into a perfect chignon, greeted her with a gentle smile. "Khloe, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Arthur, Mr. Pendleton is just finishing a call. Can I get you some tea? Something to eat?" Her kindness was so unexpected it almost made Khloe cry. She numbly accepted the tea. A few minutes later, a set of tall, soundproof doors opened. "Send her in, Genevieve." The voice was deep calm and carried an effortless authority. Khloe walked into the office. It was larger than Jessica's entire apartment. One wall was a plate glass window with a breathtaking view of Central Park. The man standing by the window turned and Khloe's breath caught. She had expected someone old and frail. Arthur Pendleton was in his late 60s, but he stood with the posture of a man half his age. He was tall and lean, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His hair was a distinguished silver, but his eyes, a startlingly sharp blue, were what held her. They were filled with an unnerving intelligence, a deep-seated power, and something else she couldn't quite place, a profound sadness. "Khloe," he said, his voice softening, "you have your mother's eyes." He gestured to a comfortable leather chair opposite his immense desk. He didn't sit behind it in the seat of power. Instead, he took the chair next to hers. "Your father," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "was the best man I ever knew. He was the best man at my wedding. I was the best man at his. We met at university. He was the brilliant scholar with no money, and I was the fool with a trust fund who didn't know what to do with it. He taught me about history, about integrity. He taught me what mattered. When he and your mother passed, I was abroad closing the biggest deal of my life. I didn't get back in time for the funeral. It is the single greatest regret of my life." He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "I promised him I would always be there for you. A promise I have clearly failed to keep. I respected your desire for independence, but I should have checked in. I should have done more than just watch from a distance. For that, I am truly sorry. Now," he leaned forward slightly, "tell me everything, and do not spare a single detail." And so she did. The whole story poured out of her. The whirlwind romance, the gilded Beatrice's cruelty, Jonathan's cold ambition, the pregnancy, the fake photograph, and the final humiliating expulsion into the rain. She spoke for nearly an hour, her voice cracking at times, but she didn't cry. Arthur Pendleton listened with an almost unnerving stillness, his expression unreadable, his blue eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Arthur stood and walked to the window, his back to her, looking out over the park. "Davenport Tech," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I know the company. Over-leveraged, built on a foundation of aggressive acquisitions and hype. Jonathan Davenport fancies himself a modern-day Rockefeller, I hear." He turned around, and the sadness in his eyes had been replaced by something else entirely. It was a cold, controlled fire. It was the look of a predator. "He made 2 mistakes. Arthur said, his voice like chipping granite. The first was laying a hand on the daughter of Michael Walsh. The second was thinking he could get away with it. He walked to his desk and pressed an intercom button. Genevieve, clear my schedule for the rest of the week. Get me Robert Chen from litigation, Maria Fuentes from forensic accounting, and Daniel Silva from our private investigations unit. I want them in the main conference room in 10 minutes. Also have the penthouse suite at the Pendleton Grand prepared for Ms. Walsh, indefinitely. And call Dr. Madigan. I want her to assemble the best prenatal team in the country for an immediate consultation. He released the button and looked back at Khloe. You are not homeless, Khloe. You are not alone. You are a Pendleton ward. From this moment on, every resource I possess is at your disposal. We are not going to get you a settlement. We are going to dismantle Jonathan Davenport's world piece by piece. He wanted to erase you. Instead, we will make him wish he had never been born. Khloe stared at him, bewildered by the speed and scale of his response. Pendleton and Associates, I thought you were a lawyer. Arthur Pendleton gave a slight, grim smile. I am a lawyer, Khloe. But Pendleton and Associates is not a law firm. It is the holding company for my family's assets. I own banks, real estate, tech firms, media outlets. I have a law firm, of course, one of the best, and you have just become its most important client. He was her godfather, but he wasn't just a lawyer. He was a billionaire, a titan of industry whose name was whispered with fear and reverence on Wall Street and in the halls of power. And Jonathan Davenport had just picked a fight with him. The Pendleton Grand Hotel was not a place you simply booked a room. It was a place you were invited to. Khloe was escorted to the penthouse suite, a sprawling apartment in the sky with panoramic views of the city she had been cast out of just days before. A personal attendant showed her the walk-in closet, already stocked with a collection of designer maternity wear. A private chef was on call. A team of doctors led by the renowned Dr. Eleanor Madigan arrived within hours for a gentle, thorough consultation, assuring her that she and the baby were healthy. It was disorienting. She had gone from a queen's sofa to unimaginable luxury in the span of a morning. But beneath the comfort, a new feeling was taking root, a fierce, burning resolve. She wasn't just a victim to be coddled. She was a partner in the coming war. Meanwhile, in the main conference room at Pendleton and Associates, the gears were turning. Robert Chen, a legendary litigator with a reputation for surgically dismantling his opponents in court. Maria Fuentes, a forensic accountant who could find a single fraudulent dollar in a mountain of offshore shell corporations. And Daniel Silva, a former intelligence operative who ran Pendleton's private security and investigations, all sat around a gleaming obsidian table. Arthur presided. The objective is not just victory, but annihilation. Arthur stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Jonathan Davenport believes his money makes him untouchable. We will demonstrate that his wealth is a house of cards in a hurricane. The plan was multifaceted. Maria and her team would begin a deep dive into Davenport Tech's financials and Jonathan's personal accounts. His new money, Maria said, her eyes gleaming. They're always sloppy. They want to hide their wealth, but they also can't resist showing it off. I'll find the seams. Daniel Silva's team would handle the infidelity accusation. A faked photo. A coerced friend, Daniel said with a dismissive wave. Amateur hour. We'll find the photographer who took the picture, the original files, the payment trail. We'll find out who paid him. We'll have a signed, notarized confession on your desk within 72 hours. Robert Chen, the lawyer, would prepare the legal assault. "We won't just file for divorce," he said, tapping a pen on a legal pad. "We'll file for annulment on the grounds of fraud alongside the divorce proceedings. We'll file for damages for emotional distress defamation and wrongful eviction. We'll hit him with a temporary restraining order, so severe he won't be able to come within 500 yards of Ms. Walsh or any property she occupies. And we will do it all very, very publicly." The first shot was fired 2 days later. Jonathan Davenport was the guest of honor at the annual Titans of Tech charity gala, a glittering affair filled with reporters and industry rivals. He was preening for the cameras, a beautiful model on his arm, projecting an image of a man unbothered moving on. As he was pontificating about his company's new AI venture, a man in an impeccably tailored yet unassuming suit approached him. "Miss Jonathan Davenport?" the man asked politely but firmly. "Yes," Jonathan answered, annoyed at the interruption. The man handed him a thick, cream-colored envelope. "You've been served." Jonathan stared at the envelope, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He probably expected some nuisance suit from a low-rent lawyer Khloe had managed to scrape together. He opened it. The weight of the paper alone was intimidating. He scanned the first page. His face, which had been a mask of smug confidence, slowly drained of all color. The camera flashes which he had been soaking in moments before now seemed to illuminate his sudden stark terror. He saw the claims, fraud, defamation, a dozen other terrifying legal terms. He saw the demand for a full forensic audit of all his assets, personal and corporate. But it was the letterhead at the top of the page that made his blood run cold. It didn't say Chen, Miller and Finch, or some other expected legal name. It said simply, Pendleton and Associates Office of the General Counsel. He had never heard of it, which in his world meant it was nothing. He turned to his own lawyer, a bulldog named Mr. Graves, who was standing nearby. "What the hell is this Pendleton and Associates?" Mr. Graves took the document, read the first page, and his professionally cynical face went pale. He looked at Jonathan as if he were a dead man walking. "Oh God, Jonathan," Graves whispered, his voice hoarse. "What did you do?" "What?" Jonathan snapped. "It's some no-name firm. We'll crush them." Graves shook his head, looking around the room as if expecting a bolt of lightning to strike them both. "Jonathan, Pendleton and Associates isn't a law firm. It's Arthur Pendleton. You haven't hired a lawyer. Khloe has hired a god. We're not in a lawsuit. We're in a war. We've already lost." Panic is an acid. For Jonathan Davenport, it began to eat away at the polished veneer he had spent his life constructing. His initial bluster faded quickly after his conversation with Graves. He learned that Arthur Pendleton wasn't just a billionaire. He was a keystone of the global financial system. He sat on boards, advised governments, and owned silent, controlling stakes in companies Jonathan thought were his competitors. To anger Arthur Pendleton was akin to personally offending the laws of gravity. The assault was relentless and silent. There were no angry phone calls, no threatening letters. There was only a quiet, systematic dismantling of his life. Maria Fuentes' team of forensic accountants worked with the efficiency of a military unit. They were financial ghosts, slipping through digital firewalls and untangling complex webs of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Panama that Jonathan had created to hide assets and evade taxes. They discovered he hadn't just hidden money from Khloe. He'd been hiding it from the IRS for years. They found evidence that Davenport Tech's spectacular earnings reports were inflated, propped up by shell companies buying their own products to create the illusion of massive growth. Simultaneously, Daniel Silver's investigators addressed the personal betrayal. They didn't need 72 hours. It took them 48. They tracked down the photographer, a freelancer named Marco, in his rundown studio in Brooklyn. Marco, when faced with two of Silver's calm but imposing operatives and the threat of federal charges for conspiracy and fraud, confessed immediately. He hadn't just been paid. He'd been coached by Beatrice Davenport herself. She had met with him, given him the time and place of Khloe's lunch, and instructed him on the exact angles to shoot to imply an affair. The payment, a substantial sum of $50,000, had been made from a trust fund Beatrice controlled. Daniel's team had the bank records, a recording of Marco's confession, and the original time-stamped digital photos, which clearly showed the lunch for what it was, an innocent meeting between friends. But they didn't stop there. They dug into Beatrice's life. They discovered that she had been pressuring Jonathan to break his prenuptial agreement with Khloe and marry the daughter of a rival tech mogul, a move that would have created a powerful corporate alliance. Khloe and her unborn child were not just an inconvenience. They were an obstacle to a merger. The accusation of infidelity wasn't born of suspicion. It was a calculated business decision. Jonathan felt the ground crumbling beneath him. His business partners grew distant. Bankers who had once fawned over him suddenly weren't returning his calls. Whispers started circulating on Wall Street about Davenport Tech being a house of cards. A prominent financial news blog, which Khloe now knew was owned by a subsidiary of Pendleton and Associates, published a well-sourced, deeply researched article questioning the company's valuation and accounting practices. The stock price, once his proudest achievement, began to slide. He stormed into his mother's penthouse apartment on Park Avenue, waving a copy of the legal filings. "This is your fault," he screamed. "You and your pathetic little scheme with the photographer. Did you have any idea who her family was?" Beatrice, for the first time in Jonathan's memory, looked frightened. "How could I know? She was a nobody. A scholarship artist from nowhere. Well, her godfather is Arthur Pendleton," he roared. "The Arthur Pendleton, he's going to ruin us. He's going to ruin me." "Don't be ridiculous, Jonathan," she said, trying to regain her composure. "It's a simple divorce, a domestic squabble. We will offer her a generous settlement. She will take the money and disappear." "You don't get it, do you?" He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "They're not asking for money. They're asking for everything. They sent a subpoena for every financial record going back 10 years. They know about the Zurich accounts. They know about the shell companies." Beatrice sank into a silk-upholstered chair, her face ashen. The world she had so carefully dominated, the world of society, galas, and boardroom whispers, was dissolving. They had kicked a hornet's nest, only to discover it was attached to a grizzly bear. The final blow to Jonathan's personal life came not from a lawyer, but from Khloe herself. Under the guidance of Robert Chen, she filed a petition not just for divorce, but for a court-ordered paternity test to be administered the moment the baby was born. The petition was made public. The story was irresistible to the press. The millionaire who threw his pregnant wife out over cheating allegations was now being legally challenged to prove the child wasn't his. His narrative of the wronged husband was shattered. He was now cast as the villain, a cruel, paranoid bully. The public, and more importantly, the market, loves a hero and despises a villain. And Jonathan Davenport had been irrevocably cast. The day of the preliminary hearing was a media circus. Reporters and television crews crowded the steps of the New York County Courthouse. Jonathan Davenport arrived looking haggard, his bespoke suit unable to hide the stress that had carved new lines into his face. He walked with a forced confidence, flanked by Mr. Graves and a team of anxious-looking junior lawyers. Then Khloe arrived. She didn't slip in through a side entrance. She walked up the main steps poised and serene. She was dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue maternity dress, her condition now obvious and undeniable. She wasn't alone. On one side was her lead counsel, the formidable Robert Chen. On the other, walking with a calm, protective authority that silenced the crowd, was Arthur Pendleton. He wasn't on the legal team, but his presence was a statement more powerful than any legal brief. The lion was there to watch over his cub. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Harriet Miller, looked down from her bench with an expression of deep impatience for the theatrics. Mr. Graves began attempting to paint Jonathan as the victim of a gold-digging opportunist. He spoke of Khloe's humble origins and Jonathan's generosity. He brought up the photograph as evidence of her infidelity. "Your Honor," Graves argued, "my client had every reason to believe his trust had been betrayed. He acted out of heartbreak." When he finished, Robert Chen rose. He was a master of understated destruction. He didn't raise his voice. He simply presented facts. "Your Honor, the defense speaks of heartbreak. We will speak of conspiracy. We submit Exhibit A, a sworn, videotaped affidavit from Mr. Marco Velez, the photographer hired to take these pictures." He played the video. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Marco detailed his meetings with Beatrice Davenport, her explicit instructions and the payment he received. "We submit Exhibit B." Chen continued, his voice even. "Bank records confirming a transfer of $50,000 from a trust managed by Ms. Beatrice Davenport to Mr. Velez, dated 2 days before the photographs were taken." A murmur went through the courtroom. Jonathan shot a murderous look at his mother, who was sitting in the front row, looking as if she had swallowed poison. "As for my client's alleged opportunism," Chen went on, "we have a different narrative. The narrative of a wife who was systematically isolated, emotionally abused, and ultimately discarded when she and her unborn child became an impediment to her husband's business ambitions." He then dropped the bombshell. "Furthermore, Your Honor, our forensic accounting review, which is still in its preliminary stages, has uncovered significant financial discrepancies. We have evidence of numerous undisclosed offshore accounts, the systematic undervaluation of marital assets, and potential corporate fraud designed to deceive not only my client, but Mr. Davenport's shareholders and the Internal Revenue Service. We have already forwarded our initial findings to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York." The air was sucked out of the room. This was no longer a divorce hearing. It was a potential federal criminal case. Mr. Graves was on his feet objecting furiously, but the damage was done. Judge Miller's eyes were fixed on Jonathan, her expression one of utter contempt. But Arthur Pendleton had one more move to make. He had promised Khloe he would not just win, but that he would give her back her voice. Robert Chen called Khloe to the stand. Her voice was quiet but steady as she answered Chen's questions, recounting the loneliness of her marriage and the terror of being thrown out. Then Mr. Graves made the fatal mistake of cross-examining her. He tried to portray her as hysterical and vindictive. "Miss Walsh," he began with a sneer, "isn't it true that you were unhappy in your marriage and saw this pregnancy as a way to secure a larger payday?" Khloe looked not at the lawyer but directly at Jonathan. "I was unhappy because my husband treated me like an acquisition, not a wife. And this baby—" Her voice broke for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure, placing a hand on her stomach. "This baby is the only thing from that life that was ever truly real. The only thing that wasn't about money or appearances. "And you," she said to Jonathan, her voice ringing with clarity. "You threw us away like we were trash. You can keep your money. You can keep your glass palace. All I want is for my child to have a father worthy of the name. And that man is not you." Her words hung in the silent courtroom. It was over. Everyone knew it. Jonathan Davenport sat slumped in his chair, a broken man. He had come to court to paint his wife as a villain and had been exposed as a monster. The law, backed by the infinite resources and cold fury of Arthur Pendleton, had peeled back his layers of wealth and revealed the rotten core within. The judgment in the courtroom was not an ending, but the beginning of a final, spectacular collapse. The news that the U.S. Attorney's Office was investigating Davenport Tech hit the financial world like a lightning strike. The company, once the darling of Wall Street, became instantly toxic. Its stock, which Jonathan had watched climb with godlike pride, didn't just slide. It plummeted into a free fall from which it would never recover. Investors, partners, and board members ran for the exits, trampling one another in a desperate stampede to disassociate themselves from the Davenport name. Jonathan was forced into a humiliating resignation, a deposed king cast out of his own castle. Faced with the ironclad evidence presented by Pendleton's team and the looming threat of decades in federal prison for a litany of fraud and tax evasion charges, Jonathan Davenport's fight was over. He capitulated completely. The divorce settlement was a meticulous, brutal dissection of a fallen empire. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a list of terms delivered by Robert Chen, to which Jonathan's lawyers could only nod in weary acceptance. Khloe received a financial settlement so substantial it guaranteed the generational security of her and her child. But the monetary aspect was secondary. The true justice was in the details. In a final act of poetic retribution, she was awarded the entirety of Jonathan's private art collection. He had bought masterpieces to prove his status, but now the collection, including several of Khloe's own early paintings he had once condescendingly purchased, belonged to the artist he had tried to silence. The crown jewel of the settlement, however, was full unencumbered ownership of the Long Island mansion, the glass palace itself. For Beatrice Davenport, the punishment was not financial, but social. The society she had ruled with an iron fist turned on her with breathtaking secours. Invitations to galas dried up. Her calls went unreturned. She was publicly snubbed at a charity luncheon she had chaired for a decade, the whispers of the women at the surrounding tables as sharp and cold as ice. Stripped of her son's fortune and influence, she was just an old, cruel woman in an opulent Park Avenue apartment, a queen reigning over a kingdom of ghosts. A month after the settlement was finalized, Khloe drove out to Long Island alone. She walked through the silent, cavernous rooms of the mansion, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. It was a mausoleum of a life she no longer recognized. She stood in the West Wing studio, the afternoon light streaming through the massive windows. This room had been her only sanctuary, but it was also a part of her prison. She could still feel the phantom chill of Jonathan's disapproval, the lingering scent of Beatrice's expensive, judgmental perfume. She knew then she could never live there. The house wasn't a prize, it was a chain. Following a long conversation with Arthur, she made a decision. She put the mansion and its entire contents on the market. It sold within a week to a foreign investor. With the immense proceeds, she established the Walsh Foundation, a non-profit with a singular clear mission to provide grants, studio space, and mentorship to gifted young artists who, like her, came from backgrounds with no connections and no money. She would turn her gilded cage into a key for others. 6 months after her day in court, Khloe gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. In the quiet private hospital room, paid for by her own funds, she held her son and cried tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She named him Michael after the father whose integrity and love had reached across time to save her. Arthur Pendleton was the first visitor. The titan of industry, a man who could move markets with a single phone call, entered the room with a reverence Khloe had never seen. When she placed the tiny bundled baby in his arms, the powerful billionaire seemed to melt. He looked down at the face of his god-grandson, his sharp blue eyes softening with a profound love and a fierce protectiveness. "Hello, Michael," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Your grandfather was the greatest man I ever knew. You have a lot to live up to." In that moment, Khloe knew her son would never lack for a strong, honorable father figure. She found a new home, not in the ostentatious world of Manhattan penthouses or Long Island estates, but in a beautiful, light-filled brownstone in a quiet, tree-lined Brooklyn neighborhood. It had a small garden in the back and high ceilings that welcomed the sun. The entire top floor became her studio, a sprawling, happy mess of canvases, paint, and light. It wasn't a cage, it was a nest. Here she began to paint again. The frantic, fearful energy that had fueled her work in the mansion was gone. It was replaced by a deep, powerful current of peace and strength. She painted Michael sleeping in his crib, the sunlight tracing patterns on his face. She painted the view from her studio window, the changing seasons on her quiet street. Her work was imbued with a raw honesty and a mature confidence that was breathtaking. A year after Michael's birth, her old friend from the gallery that had started it all begged her to do a solo show. Khloe was hesitant, but Arthur encouraged her. "It is time," he said, "for the world to see you as you are." The opening night was packed. The art world was buzzing with the story of the artist who had emerged from the ashes of a scandalous divorce. But when they saw the paintings, the gossip fell away, replaced by an awed silence. The work was undeniable. It was the art of a woman who had seen the worst of the world and had chosen to create beauty. The entire collection sold out before the night was over. A review in a major art journal called her the defining new voice of her generation. One afternoon, while rocking Michael to sleep, she saw a small article on her tablet. Jonathan Davenport had accepted a plea bargain, agreeing to serve 3 years in a minimum security prison and pay hundreds of millions in fines. He was a cautionary tale, a footnote in the business pages. Khloe looked at the article, then at the sleeping child in her arms, and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a distant, quiet peace. He was a ghost from another life. She was no longer Khloe Davenport, the millionaire's discarded wife. She was Khloe Walsh, a mother, a philanthropist, and a celebrated artist whose voice, once silenced, now resonated with power and truth. She had learned the hardest lesson of all, that some cages are made of gold, and true freedom isn't about escaping them, but about having the strength to build your own world. She had lost a husband who saw her as a possession, but had found a family that cherished her as a treasure. In the end, Jonathan hadn't erased her. His cruelty had been the catalyst that set her free, allowing her to take the shattered pieces of her past and create a new masterpiece more vibrant and beautiful than any she had ever dared to imagine. 4 years passed in a blur of creative fulfillment and domestic peace. Khloe's world was a vibrant canvas, painted in the bright, happy colors of her son. Michael's laughter, the warm, earthy tones of her work in the studio, and the steady, grounding presence of Arthur Pendleton. Michael, at 5 years old, was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, with his mother's artistic sensitivity and a sharp, inquisitive mind that missed nothing. The Walsh Foundation had become a celebrated success, launching the careers of several brilliant young artists, who in turn were changing the landscape of the New York art scene. Khloe's life was full her past, a distant storm she had long since weathered. The news arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon, delivered by Arthur in the quiet study of her Brooklyn brownstone, as Michael napped upstairs. "He's been released," Arthur said, his voice calm, but with a protective edge. "Jonathan Davenport, early release for good behavior. My people tell me he served his time quietly. He's out with a fraction of his former wealth, living in a rented apartment in New Jersey." Khloe felt a sudden phantom chill, an involuntary tightening in her chest. It wasn't the paralyzing fear of before, but the unpleasant shock of a healed wound being unexpectedly prodded. "What does he want?" she asked, her voice steady. "We don't know yet," Arthur admitted. "He's made no moves, contacted no one. He is for all intents and purposes a private citizen. But we are watching him, Khloe. He will not get within a mile of you or Michael without us knowing." She nodded, grateful for the invisible fortress Arthur had built around their lives. She tried to push the thought of Jonathan away, to file it under past threats neutralized. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. A week later, Michael came home from his kindergarten class. His face scrunched in thought. He was quiet during dinner, pushing his food around his plate. Later, as Khloe was tucking him into bed, he finally asked the question she had been dreading for 5 years. "Mummy," he said, his small voice serious as he looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "At circle time, we talked about our families. Everyone has a mummy and a daddy. You're my mummy, but where is my daddy?" The simple, guileless question struck her with more force than any legal summons or public humiliation ever had. How could she explain a man like Jonathan to this perfect, loving child? How could she distill the cruelty, the betrayal, and the greed into a story a 5-year-old could understand without being poisoned by it? To lie felt wrong. To tell the truth felt like a kind of violence. That night, after Michael was asleep, she called Arthur, her voice thick with unshed tears. "What do I say to him, Arthur? How do I tell him his father is a man who tried to pretend he didn't exist?" Arthur's voice was a comforting balm. "You tell him a version of the truth that he can carry," he advised gently. "You tell him that a father isn't just the person who helps make you, but the person who shows up to love you. You tell him his father made very big mistakes that hurt people and that he had to go away. And then you remind him of all the love he does have. Your love. My love. That is his truth, Khloe. That is his foundation." Armed with this wisdom, she felt stronger. But the ultimate test was yet to come. The following Saturday, while leaving a small bookstore with Michael, she saw him. Jonathan. He was standing across the street, looking thin and shockingly ordinary in a worn jacket. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a hesitant, haunted stillness. He wasn't watching them in a menacing way. He looked almost lost. When his eyes met hers, a jolt went through her, but she felt no fear. She simply tightened her grip on Michael's hand and walked away. 2 days later, a letter arrived. It wasn't sent to her home, but to her gallery forwarded by the owner. It had been hand-delivered. The handwriting was Jonathan's. Her first instinct was to burn it. Instead, she waited until Michael was asleep, poured a glass of wine, and with a deep breath she opened it. "Khloe," it began, "I don't have the right to ask for anything, least of all your forgiveness. Prison does one of two things to a man. It makes him harder, or it breaks him down to his foundations. I was broken. I spent 3 years with nothing but time to see the man I was. A monster of ego and insecurity. The things I did to you, to our unborn child. They are an evil I will carry for the rest of my days. I am not writing to ask for a second chance. I am not writing to ask for money. I saw you the other day. With him. Michael. He is beautiful. He looks happy. He looks like you. I am writing to ask for an impossible thing. Not now, and maybe not ever. But for the hope that one day when he is old enough to understand, you might allow me 5 minutes to look my son in the eye and tell him I am sorry. Not to be his father, but to simply be the man who admits he failed him. It is all I have left to live for. If your answer is no, I will accept it, and you will never hear from me again. Jonathan." Khloe read the letter twice, then a third time, the words blurring. This was the one thing she had never prepared for. Not a threat, but a plea. Not a monster, but a man drowning in the consequences of his own actions. She thought for a long time, her heart a confusing mix of old pain and a strange, unexpected flicker of pity. She walked into Michael's room and watched him sleep, his face a picture of perfect innocence. Her duty was to him, to protect that innocence. But was it protection to erase a part of his story, or to give him the tools to understand it one day? The next day, she wrote a short reply. She sent it via Robert Chen to ensure there was no direct contact. Jonathan, my only priority is Michael's well-being. Your past actions proved you were a threat to that. The future is unwritten. If you wish for any kind of hope, it will not be earned with words, but with a life of quiet, consistent amends. Become a man my son could one day meet without being harmed by the encounter. Find a purpose that is not centered on yourself. Stay away from us. Do not try to contact us again. My Godfather's associates will be watching. If you can live a life of integrity, for years to come, if you can prove that your change is real and not a performance, then perhaps when Michael is a man and can choose for himself a conversation may be possible. The choice and the work is yours. Khloe. As she gave the letter to be sent, a profound sense of finality washed over her. She had not offered forgiveness. She had offered a difficult, narrow path toward a distant possibility of redemption, a path that kept her and her son completely safe. She had faced the ghost of her past, not with fear or anger, but with the calm, unwavering authority of a queen defending her realm. Jonathan Davenport no longer held any power over her. The echo of his name was just that, a faint sound from a world away, powerless to disturb the beautiful, vibrant world she had built with her own 2 hands. Her canvas was vast, and her future was her own masterpiece to create. Khloe's journey from the cold steps of a mansion to the warm light of her own art studio is a powerful reminder that our darkest moments can often lead to our brightest futures. It's a story about the immense difference between wealth and worth, and how the family we find can be stronger than the one we're born into. She was thrown out, broken and alone. But with the help of a guardian she never knew she had, she discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. Her story proves that justice isn't always about revenge. Sometimes the greatest victory is building a beautiful life on the ashes of what was meant to destroy you. If Khloe's story of resilience and triumph moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to start over. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable, real-life stories. What part of Khloe's comeback inspired you the most? Let us know in the comments below.